Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. We are going to be doing a little dinner prep for tonight. We are going to be making the dough for our Easter bread that we're going to try out, the Italian Easter bread, you know, with the cool braided dyed eggs in it. And then we're going to be prepping some pork butt roast for our dinner tonight. I think I'm going to do kind of a Greek shredded pork. I'm still thinking exactly how it's going to be, but we've got the seasonings down right. So let's get our yeast blooming for our Italian Easter bread. We are going to put 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast into a half a cup of warm milk, and I am using whole milk. So we're going to put 1 tablespoon and a half a cup of warm milk, and then we are going to add in some sugar. We're going to add in a half a cup of sugar. And this is going to help the yeast bloom and get nice and active and foamy. Now, if you don't see that your yeast is like blooming or getting foamy after a few minutes, that means your yeast is dead and you need to get some new one because it won't actually rise. So I'm going to give it a little stir with my fork here, and then we are going to let it. We can see here, if you look in here, we've got a nice foamy top to our yeast. So we've got a good bloom on it, which is what we want. That means our yeast is nice and active. So we are going to start with the rest of the recipe. I'm going to take 3 cups of bread flour. We're going to add them to our bowl here. So 1 and 2, and this is going to be, we're making the dough for our Italian Easter bread, which is a slightly sweet bread with pretty dyed eggs braided into it and then baked, and then you glaze it and add some little sprinkles. So we've got 3 cups of bread flour there. Now we're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to give it a little swirl. And then to my yeast over here, we are going to add in a 1/4 cup of melted butter, which is the same as a half a stick. I like to add all my wet ingredients together and give them a good mix before I add them into my dry. They just kind of blend better together. We're going to put in 2 eggs. And we will need more eggs later for when we braid our dyed eggs in for it. You know, the pretty little ones. They don't have to be cooked. You don't want them to be cooked or they'll crack even further. But you can just kind of give them a quick dye on them. We are going to whip up our eggs in here. And then we're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla and a teaspoon of almond extract to it. Now, if you like, you could do a half a teaspoon of anise extract in it, but I am not a huge fan of anise. I feel like it has a licorice flavor to it. So I'm sticking with just the vanilla and almond, but traditionally you would add some anise in there. But it is not my cup of tea. So we're going to add in a teaspoon of almond extract and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And that's going to help sweeten up so we have a little bit of sugar in this recipe, but these will also help bring out a nice mild sweetness too. Here we go. So we've got our wet mixture right here, and we are going to add it to our bread flour. So I'm going to make a little well, and we're going to pour it all into this well here. And then I'm going to use my spoon to scrape out any of this sugar that was at the bottom when we poured it into our warm milk. And then I'm going to use my dough whisk. We're going to mix this together, and then we're going to give it a good knead, and then we're going to let it rest for a minute or 2, and then we'll knead it again, give it a chance to kind of hydrate the flour. And then we'll let it sit and do about a 90-minute rise. But it has that almond extract smell, which is, I love. It has, it smells like amaretto. It's just so yummy. Okay, we're going to pull this out to get all of this dough out. There we go. Get it all off here. Don't want any of it to go to waste. And we're going to knead it together. If your dough is a little bit sticky, just give it a bit more flour. Sometimes when you are scooping your bread flour, you might have a little pocket in there. So I'm just going to add a little bit more so it's just a little bit less sticky. I don't want it to stick to the counter too much when I'm kneading it. But you want a nice soft, wet to touch, but you don't want it necessarily to stick to you. And sometimes just adding just a pinch more flour does wonders. Kneading is going to be the key here. The more you knead your bread in the beginning before you do your first rise, the softer and fluffier it will be because this allows the gluten to develop. There we go. Just going to give it a nice there. And don't feel like you're being rough with it. Really get in there. Give it the nice pull and stretch. There. And my just thing is have a nice countertop, clean. It can be, or a cutting board. And you're just going to literally like push with your hands down and stretch it. So you're like pushing and folding over. That's causing you to stretch. It's like in sourdough, you do the stretch and folds. Essentially, kneading is doing the same thing, except you're doing it against the counter to help really pull it. Okay. There we go. So now we're going to let this sit for a few minutes while we finish up our meat, marinating our meat, and then we'll do our last knead on it. I always like to do a mini knead and then some of those fresh herbs off. And now we're going to do some more kneading. And this is the crucial point, because if you want a nice soft bread, you know, the ones like you get it, you know, a lot of people complain when they try to make homemade bread at home, it turns out stiff or hard, just not nice and fluffy. It's because you're not kneading it enough. So I always say you can't over knead it. You want to really develop the gluten in it, which is going to give it that nice elasticity. And then, of course, you want to do the proper rising. So we're going to knead this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to coat our bowl with oil. And we're going to roll our dough in some oil. That's going to prevent it from, it's going to keep it moist, but it's going to prevent it from sticking to the bowl. And then I'm going to put it in my oven on the bread proof setting, which is about 95 degrees. And we're going to let it rise for about an hour to an hour and a half. And then you get to do the fun shaping where you were going to braid it, and we'll braid the eggs in and do all that fun stuff. And then you got to let it rise again. So there's 2 rises, but then it will be ready to break and it will be delicious. Okay. There we go. We're just about turning it in. And you just want like your bread to be nice and like elasticy where you can stretch it. I always say you want to keep breaking these bonds and pulling it out, because that is going to give you that just delicious tender bread. Okay. We're going to shape it into our little ball. Let me grab a little bit of olive oil here. See if we can finally use up the rest of this one. And I just put it right back in that same bowl, even though it's floury or whatnot. Just put a little bit at the bottom. And then you take your ball and you're just going to coat it until you've got it all there. And then roll it around the side so your whole bowl is nice and oily. This is going to allow it to rise and not cling to the bowl. Keep it nice and tender. And then, here, I'll take a clean, just put this up there. So you can take either some saran wrap or cling wrap, put it over, or take a damp towel and put it over your bowl. And then I'm going to put it in my oven at the bread proofing setting, which is at 95 degrees, and it will nice and rise. So we're going to do that for about 90 minutes. Well, guys, we are done with. Okay, so I've had our dough for our Italian Easter bread proofing in our oven for the last hour and a half-ish. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this out and we are going to divide it into three fairly equal sections so that we can roll it out into a nice long rope. See, I feel. Yes. So now we're going to roll these out into three long snakes because we're going to braid them together and then we are going to tuck our dyed eggs in. Now, these are not cooked eggs. These are raw eggs that we dye. But when we bake them in the oven, they will cook them all the way through. If you already used hard-boiled eggs in it, they might crack when you continue to cook them. Okay. So we've got our first long braid or snake for our braid. And we're going to braid them together to make a wreath. And then we'll tuck our little eggs into the wreath. And then we got to we'll do another rise. So this is we did the first rise, which was that big rise. And then we'll do a second rise right before we bake it. And that's just going to give you a nice, like, fluffy sweet bread. And again, this is a very mildly sweet one. Traditionally, they use, anise extract in it, but I'm not the biggest fan of anise. So we did some half vanilla, half almond. Okay. Just making sure they're nice and long. And now we're going to start our braiding process just like if you were braiding hair. So we're going to go over and under. Although I will say braiding hair is much easier. As you can tell, I braid my hair every single day. There we go. And then I'm going to just tighten up this braid down here at this side. Just want to make sure. There. Now, we're going to bring it onto our parchment paper. And we need to fasten it together. So we're going to just kind of pinch them together. And you want to try to meld in, but we're going to hide an egg there. There we go. So we've got our wreath, and now we've got our 5 eggs. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently kind of tuck an egg into our dough. And they will sink down a little bit when we bake, but you want to just kind of hide them in here for it. And then when it rises, it's going to rise up around it. And it will just be really pretty. Didn't quite get my spacing right on here. There we go. And again, these are raw eggs that we have dyed with food coloring and a little bit of vinegar. And now, just going to pinch these last bits together, kind of squunch them. There, that's where we put it together. Now what we're going to do is we are going to pop this back in our oven. I'm going to take my towel that was nice and damp before. We're going to layer it over it, and then we're going to put it, and we're going to have it proof for another 30 to 45 minutes. Okay. Our Italian Easter bread, it's doing its second rise. So pretty. These are actually uncooked eggs that I dyed, and when we bake it up, they're going to cook them. But we need to give them a quick glaze with some egg water or an egg wash. So I'm going to put about a teaspoon of water in this bowl. Don't need much. And then 1 whole egg. We're going to whip it up, and then we're going to carefully brush it over our braid. Now, when we brush it over, you just want to try avoiding brushing the egg so that the dye doesn't leak. Let's get this mixed up. This egg wash will give it a nice shine when it bakes up, makes it nice and pretty looking. And this is it's called an Italian Easter bread. And it's a light, mild sweetness with it. I'm not a big fan of anise, so we didn't use anise extract. I used a mixture of vanilla and almond extract. So we are going to brush this all the way around, making sure to kind of get coated everywhere so that it has a nice even shine. So you want to make sure you really get into those creases. Here we go. And then we'll pop this in the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes until it is baked.
You have a question on those actual eggs?
They are real. They are actually raw eggs right now. When they will be hard boiled when we're done baking. But I just dyed them yesterday. Actually, I will say my daughter dyed them yesterday. We dyed a couple eggs. And this is just a fun bread where you get to bake them in it. And then you can technically eat the egg as part of like a breakfast. There we go. So just do one more brush over because you can never have too much. Perfect. Okay. Well, we're going to go pop this in the oven. We're going to bake it at 350 for we're going to put it in there for 25 minutes because it is a thicker braid. Right in here. Perfect. And I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to set it for 24 so it gives me a minute. Well, let me make our glaze real quick for our bread. Just slide this up here. And then I had to dig through and find some sprinkles that will be Easter themed. I'm really not one to want to buy, well, I love buying themed things, but I've been trying to be less materialistic and get less themed things before I use up all the stuff I have. So we're going to use about a cup of powdered sugar. And we're going to put in about, I want to say a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. You could use almond extract too if you want. And where did my cream go? Let me grab my fork. Because I find the best way to kind of mix your frosting together is with a fork. We're going to just put in a little bit of cream and then we'll add some more until we have the right consistency. You could also use milk or half and half. They all make it. Cream will give you a richer kind of glaze and then milk will give you a thinner, clearer glaze. So it's just really what what you would like. So now what we've got is kind of a thick paste. This is what I would consider good for a cinnamon roll, but we want it a little bit thinner on ours. I always put an extra minute on there so that we know. Look at it, it is gorgeous. Put my oven mitts on. And I'm going to just put my asparagus up here. They need about 1 more minute, so we'll grab them in just a second. But look at this gorgeous Easter. This is Italian Easter bread. It's a sweet bread with dyed eggs baked into it. But it is absolutely gorgeous. I think it's called, I can't even, I'll butcher it, but it is the Italian Easter bread. I feel like a Greeks make one. There's a bunch of different versions of it, but it is flavored with almond and vanilla, and it's just mildly sweet and brushed with an egg wash, which gives you that nice shiny crust. And then we're gonna dress it with some glaze and some sprinkles for a full-on effect, but I'm excited for this. That's almost done. Let's get our glaze to the right second because I do like to glaze it when it's warm so that it melts over it and really coats it. You know, it's like your donuts. You want to glaze them when they're nice and hot. Okay. We're getting here. Again, we need it to be brushable. This is very thick, so we want it a little bit thinner. And I will say I follow a strict recipe when it comes to like making my frostings. it's typically like the visual. Once it hits that, like the texture and the feel, then I know it's right. Okay, there we go. This is kind of like Elmer's glue, because when we put it on and while it's hot, it will continue to melt it more. So let's see if we've got, do I have any yet? Yes, excellent. I was hoping I had another one of these. So we're gonna brush this over our thing. So here we go.
You have a question, is that regular milk that's in the glaze?
This is cream. Now you can use regular milk or half and half. I find cream gives you a much richer tasting glaze. I think it's just a little bit nicer. Whole milk or like regular milk will give you a thinner glaze. So it's really preference, but I prefer whole milk, or I prefer cream or half and half to it. Give a nice little coating, let it drizzle all around.
You had a couple questions about the eggs. Can you just go over?
Yes, so these are dyed eggs. When we put them in, they were raw. And so I just dyed them, just putting them in like food coloring and a little bit of vinegar to keep the color on, but not hot. And then when you bake them up, they make them actually hard boiled. So they're cooked all the way through now. So you can, traditionally what you would do is you take the bread, you'd break it, and then you'd also eat the egg. So now we're gonna jazz it up with some sprinkles. We're gonna try to do a nice thing. I had to find as best Easter colors as I could. So here we've got some purple, and we need some pink, and do a little orange. Do I have any light green? I do over here. And then we'll put some little perils, which are those small, like pearl-like ones. So this one's kind of a collection. I told you I had a weird collection. I had Halloween and I had Christmas, and then I don't even know why I have pink and green, but I had a weird collection. So you've got those on there. So you have those fun little Easter ones. And then these are the little pretty ones that give you that nice little pop. And voila, we have our Italian Easter bread, which is a mildly sweet bread that we glazed with a nice vanilla glaze, and it will just be delicious for dessert tonight. Okay.